Welcome back. Well, there is unrest in the Middle East. I would almost say, I want to say like never before, but we have seen so much conflict over the decades, the centuries in the Middle East. That's a far statement to say. But I will say this. There's more unrest in the Middle East now under the Biden regime than there ever was under the Trump administration. That I can say with all confidence. This as Hamas now has been launching multiple missiles into Israel. There's been fights on the ground, conflict, not daily, but a lot more than usual. Israel now saying they have successfully struck back, though, at Gaza. Their Iron Dome defense system did intercept a rocket that was launched from Gaza Strip earlier this week. The Israeli Air Force tweeting out, in response to this attack, fighter jets struck a weapons manufacturing site belonging to the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip. They go on to say, the IDF holds Hamas responsible for all terror activity emanating from the Gaza Strip. Now, this all goes down as just days ago, Palestinians clashed with Israeli police. This happened inside of a mosque in East Jerusalem, we're told. Take a look. Israeli police accuse them of desecrating that mosque. Meantime, according to Israel, they have also successfully tested their new laser missile defense system. Do we have stuff like this? The Iron Beam, as they're calling it, intercepted rockets, even anti-tank missiles during tests last month. Cool stuff. Israel's goal is to deploy the Iron Beam over the next decade to continue to protect their country from attacks from Hamas. Now, as Israel continues to strengthen their defense, other nations are threatening any move could put them at risk. Now, which nations are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the murderous thugs in Iran. Iran now warning Israel's slightest move would prompt a strike into their heart. Iranian president warning earlier this week if Israel chooses to make any moves against Iran, they will face, quote, severe consequences. Again, why is all this happening now when there was so much peace for several years in those countries? Well, I think you know the answer. But let's talk to a professional about it. Harley Lippman is a foreign policy expert, executive committee member of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and also the CEO and founder of Genocide 10. He joins me now to discuss the latest conflict happening in his homeland. Harley, welcome back to the program. How are you, sir?
Thank you. Great, thank you. How are you?
Well, you know, I'm watching what's happening here on my homeland. I'm watching what's happening on yours, and I'm saying, man, there was a lot more peace just not a few years ago, a year and a few months ago. And one of the things I can look at that changed is the person sitting in the Oval Office and the policy when it comes to America and Israel relations, but more importantly, America and Iran relations and the Iran nuclear deal. And I got to think by just talking about re-entering it, that's what's causing a lot of this conflict, unfortunately for you and your countrymen.
Yeah, you know, what's going on is that the enemies of the United States and Israel, they're the same. It's Iran, Russia, China, and they sense weakness. And if they sense weakness, they're going to take full advantage of it. And, you know, you can't repeat this often enough. They size up an American president, they test the American president, and we've given them examples, unfortunately, where we've shown weakness. The way we left Afghanistan, for example, with such humiliation. And it was a situation where we didn't just leave, we ran out, leaving behind all this equipment and leaving the poor Afghanis to the mercy of the Taliban. And the Taliban are people that are, they're anathema to all the core values that we have. And you just mentioned about Hamas firing rockets into Israel. And I think it's worth bringing up what the difference is in that conflict. You have some people look at this and go, Hamas is firing rockets, Israel retaliates, they're all causing damage. It can make them all look like a moral equivalent. There is a world of difference. And that is that if we stand for anything, it's that whatever your grievance is, you can't deliberately murder innocent people, women and children.
Right.
And you have, as you know, with Hamas, they'll just fire rockets willy-nilly into civilian areas and deliberately try to kill women and children, the way Russia does in Ukraine. And this is the difference. So there is a good and bad, a good and evil. It really is. And that makes all the difference. And as we see who's starting this, who's causing this damage and wars and violence and death. It's Hamas, Hezbollah. It's the Houthi in Yemen firing rockets into Saudi Arabia on a daily basis.
And Harley, sometimes force has to be met with force. When I hear somebody say, well, Israel's just as bad or just as guilty, no, folks. And for all you anti-Semites out there and Jew haters and Israel haters, let me tell you what, folks, they don't prompt this. They don't instigate this. You're defending your people. Like you just said, if Hamas launches into civilian, Israel's very specific about going like this last week at a plant that's producing those weapons. And then you hit the plant. And well, they don't have a military. You hit their, whatever you guys call them, I don't know. They're insurgents. They're members of their terrorist organization. You kill the bad guys. They're just launching stuff willy-nilly at innocent civilians. And I'm glad you brought up that we left $85 billion behind in Afghanistan, because just before you came on, Harley, I was discussing the weapons in Ukraine. You said we're helping Ukraine. Guess what? New report. We don't know where some of the stuff is we already sent there.
I know. I'm hearing about that. There's a lot of it's sitting in warehouses in Kiev, because there's a big problem in getting it from there to the front lines, and they desperately need it on the front lines. We're seeing in Ukraine now a massive military attack that we have not seen since World War II, and this really serves the Russians well. They want open terrain where they can maneuver with their tanks. They didn't do well in the cities, like in the suburbs of Kiev, but I'm very worried about the future there.
Harley, do you think, sorry to interrupt, but do you think that Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, any of them in the Middle East, you said they watch what happened in Afghanistan, they've got to be watching what Putin's doing in Ukraine. And again, they're looking at what Biden is doing, his responses in all these scenarios, and our invasion of our southern border. And that has to be, all of this has to be emboldening your enemies in the Middle East, doesn't it?
Right, it does. Democracies don't go to war with each other. It's dictatorships that go to war with democracy. And when we look out over the Middle East and we see what's going on, you can't but help think back on President Bush and Kuwait. Remember when Iraq, I think it was 1990 or 1991, took over the country of Kuwait. President Bush said at the time, "This will not stand." We're not hearing that now from this president. We should be hearing that, because what happened then was we felt that a big, powerful nation should not have the right to dominate and take over a smaller, weaker nation. So we stood for those values, and those values will keep peace in the world. So it's important we maintain that. And the fact that we've weakened that, as you can see with this president, is enabling bigger, stronger powers to assert themselves and hurt weaker nations, like what Russia's doing to Ukraine. And it's a disaster, but this is all avoidable. Countries, dictatorships calculate and measure. And if they see that you stand up to them, if they see they have a big price to pay, if we show strong leadership, we could prevent war and violence. So some people think of us as being hawks. We're not. We're doves. We want peace. But the way to get to peace is to show strength and resolve.
Exactly. So President Trump said all the time. Harley Lippman, thank you so much, as always, for coming on the program. I worry that if Biden stays in office any longer, this will only continue to get worse globally. Because, again, America is always that shining city on the hill, right? That beacon of hope and freedom and democracy. And when we're weak, look what's happening in the Middle East. Look at Ukraine. Look at China, Taiwan. Look at everywhere. Harley Lippman, thank you. God bless you, sir.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.